Oscar was a king, but not the kind with a crown. He was the kind with a $1 billion bank account and a skyscraper with his name on it. Tonight, he was teaching his son, Joshua, how a man of their station ate dinner in the fanciest, quietest, most velvet-cushioned restaurant in the whole city. Joshua, only 8, wore a suit that cost more than some folks' rent. He was supposed to be listening to his dad talk about business deals and the correct way to hold a soup spoon, but Joshua's eyes kept pulling to the big glass window where the cold, dark world outside was rushing by. Then, in the glow of the street lamp, he saw her, a lady with tired eyes, her arm wrapped around a tiny boy who looked just like him, maybe even smaller. The woman was scraping something out of a trash can, and the cold air seemed to bite right through her thin coat. Joshua felt a funny, hot twist in his stomach, the kind of feeling grown-ups don't talk about. He knew his dad, Oscar, who could buy the whole street with a snap of his fingers, saw her too. And what Oscar did next, in front of the chilled glass, was so far from what Joshua expected that it made the expensive soup instantly taste like dust. He didn't just ignore her. He didn't just give money. He did something that could either save her or shatter everything he had built. Watch to the very end. Kindly endeavor to like, subscribe, and comment what you learned if you find this story intriguing. The restaurant, the Gold Leaf, was so quiet you could hear the soft clink of silver hitting the porcelain plate. It smelled like expensive spices and fresh bread. For Oscar, this was just Tuesday. He was built like a tower, always wearing a sharp suit that looked like it was tailored from solid ambition. He was talking about how important it was to always look people in the eye when you shook their hand. Joshua, his son, a small, bright-eyed copy of his dad, kept trying to follow the instructions, but his focus was stuck outside. The woman he saw was named Lydia. She wasn't looking in the trash can anymore. She was sitting on a cold stone bench near the street lamp, her head bowed. The little boy beside her, maybe 6 years old, was huddled into her side, trying to make himself small against the December cold. Lydia pulled a thin, worn blanket up around his ears. Joshua watched her hands. They were red and chapped, the nails broken. He saw her rub the boy's back in a slow, tired motion, like a machine running on the last drop of fuel. "Joshua?" Oscar's voice was deep, cutting through the silence of the room. "Did you hear me? I asked what you learned in your economics class today." Joshua flinched, pulling his eyes away from the window. That a bull market is good, Dad, because the horns go up." Oscar smiled, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Very good, son. And why do we care about that?" "Because when the market goes up, our money grows bigger," Joshua recited, the words sounding too big for his mouth. "Exactly. We're the builders, Joshua. We create the value. We hire the people. We pay the wages. We move the world." Oscar tapped a finger on the polished mahogany table. He was proud of this speech. He gave it often. But Joshua, remembering the woman outside, pointed a little finger towards the glass. "Dad, if we move the world, why is that lady so still?" Oscar didn't even turn his head. His eyes were trained on Joshua, but they had a faraway look, a look of steel. "That, Joshua, is the difference between those who build and those who don't. Life is about choices. Everyone gets a shot. The world is fair." Joshua frowned. "But she looks cold, Dad. The boy has holes in his shoes." Oscar picked up his water glass, swirling the ice. The silence was thick and heavy. This was the moment the tension in the room snapped tight, like a wire about to break. Oscar, the man who built an empire on seeing things others missed, could not ignore the raw, honest plea in his son's voice, and he couldn't ignore the scene outside. He'd seen poverty his whole life, but seeing it through his son's guiltless, accusing eyes felt different. It was a mirror showing a reflection he didn't want to admit was part of his world. "Waitress?" Oscar called, his voice now low and quiet. The waitress rushed over. Oscar didn't look at her either. "Order a platter of everything we are having, and a few extra warm things. Box it neatly. I want it bagged and ready in 5 minutes." Joshua's face lit up. "Are you going to give it to her, Dad?" Oscar hesitated. He looked back out the window. Lydia was gently brushing snow off her threadbare jacket. The little boy's head was resting on her shoulder. The image was simple, but it hit Oscar with unexpected force, not because of the poverty, but because of the fierce, silent love. It reminded him of his own mother, scraping by, doing whatever it took. He hated that memory. It was the reason he had worked so hard to never be that close to empty-handed again. "No," Oscar said, the word a sudden cold snap. "But Dad, you bought the food." "Listen, son, you never just give something. You create a transaction, a dependency. That is how the world works," Oscar lectured, his hand going into his inner suit pocket. He pulled out a crisp $100 bill. "I will give this to the waitress. She will take the food and the money and deliver it to that woman." Joshua frowned deeper. "But why can't we do it, Dad? Why does it have to be a secret?" "Because," Oscar said, leaning forward, his voice a gravelly whisper, "because I don't want to be seen doing this. I don't want people to think Oscar Franklin is soft. Charity is a tax write-off, not a lifestyle. And I don't want that woman thinking she can just wait outside for handouts. It's a one-time thing, a lesson in efficiency." He handed the bill to the waitress, who looked uncomfortable but nodded quickly. She scurried away. Joshua watched the whole exchange. He felt a deep disappointment, a kind of ache that came from seeing his powerful father shrink from a chance to do a simple, kind thing. The food was delivered discreetly. Lydia looked up, surprised, then quickly pulled the bag close, like a frightened rabbit pulling its young into a burrow. She didn't look at the restaurant. She looked down at the food, her shoulders hunched. Oscar watched her for a moment longer than necessary. His eyes narrowed, and a strange shadow passed over his face. It wasn't pity. It was something sharper, more like recognition. He cleared his throat and stood up. "Come on, Joshua. Dinner's over." He pushed his chair back. "But Dad, you barely touched your soup." "We're leaving," Oscar insisted. "I have a sudden need for fresh air." As they stepped out onto the sidewalk, the cold hit them immediately. Lydia and her son were still huddled by the street lamp, but they were now quietly eating the warm food. The little boy looked up as Oscar and Joshua walked past. His eyes were huge and dark, and for a fleeting second, he and Joshua locked gazes. They were wearing vastly different clothes, standing on different sides of a colossal invisible fence, but they were just two little boys looking at each other. Oscar stopped directly in front of Lydia. The high-beam lights from the oncoming traffic made his silhouette huge, looming over her. Lydia flinched, pulling her son tighter. "Sir?" she whispered, her voice rough. Oscar looked down at the boy, then at Lydia's face, which was smudged with soot and streaked with dried tears. He didn't speak the harsh, dismissive words Joshua expected. He didn't give her another $100. He did something that felt like he was ripping a part of his carefully constructed life wide open. "What is your name?" Oscar asked, his voice low and commanding, but it lost the hard edge of the billionaire and now held a tremor of something Joshua couldn't understand. "Lydia," she mumbled, clutching the bag of food. "Lydia," Oscar repeated. "I need you to tell me something, honestly. Where did you get that coat?" He pointed at the ragged gray wool coat she wore. It was oversized, with one button missing. Lydia's breathing hitched. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes went wide, and she looked up at the towering, wealthy man in front of her like a ghost. The air went still, colder than the December night. The sound of a distant siren seemed to be the only thing moving in the world. Joshua watched, his heart thumping hard against his ribs, knowing this wasn't just about a simple act of charity. This was a direct, terrifying collision of two worlds. The suspension of this moment was unbearable, heavy with an unspeakable secret only Oscar seemed to be uncovering. "How do you know that?" Lydia finally whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears, not of cold, but of fear.
The question hung in the freezing air. How do you know that?" Oscar didn't move. His shadow still covered Lydia and her son. Joshua felt his own stomach tighten into a knot of sheer curiosity and rising dread. His dad, the great unflappable Oscar Franklin, was looking at this poor woman and her coat with an intensity usually reserved for deciding whether to buy a multi-million-dollar company. "I know it," Oscar finally said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "because that coat belonged to my brother." Lydia gasped, a small, choked sound. She pressed a hand to her mouth, the ragged sleeve of the coat bunching up. The little boy, sensing his mother's panic, started to whimper and buried his face deeper into her side. "Wait, Dad," Joshua interjected, confused. "Uncle Max is in New York. He's a lawyer. He doesn't wear old gray coats." Oscar kept his gaze fixed on Lydia. "Not Max, my other brother, the one no one talks about, the one who disappeared." He reached out a hand, and Lydia instinctively pulled back. Oscar stopped, his hand hovering over the worn wool. That tear. It was right there. He ripped it when he was 10, climbing over a fence to get a stray dog. My mother sewed it, but she always used bright red thread. You can still see a speck of it if you look close, right where the gray thread has come loose. Lydia, trembling, slowly unbuttoned the coat enough to expose the inner lining of the right pocket. She pushed aside the loose gray stitching with a shaking finger. Tucked deep inside, a tiny, defiant splash of faded crimson thread was visible. Oscar let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 20 years. His eyes were suddenly wet, but he didn't blink. He looked like a statue carved from ice finally beginning to melt. "Daniel," Oscar murmured the name, a sound heavy with lost time. "My brother, Daniel. We were separated when I was young, before everything, before the money, before the life. He was supposed to go live with an aunt on the other side of the country. They told me he never made it." He looked at Lydia. "Who are you to Daniel?" Lydia's tears finally spilled over, rolling down her cold cheeks. He was my husband, sir. My Daniel. The man I loved." Joshua's mind was spinning. The cold, distant billionaire who lectured him about efficiency and bull markets was suddenly standing in front of a homeless woman talking about a secret brother who vanished and a thrift store coat that held the key. The drama was so unexpected, so powerful, it felt like a movie, but it was real. "He died," Lydia whispered, tears catching in the light. "About 6 months ago. He had a bad lung infection. He worked hard, sir. He fixed cars. He always tried. But we lost our apartment when he got sick. This coat was the last thing he owned. He told me to never get rid of it. He said it was the only thing he had from his first family. He always talked about his older brother who got rich." Oscar stood there, taking in the full force of this revelation. His missing past was staring him in the face, not as a successful sibling, but as a wife and child left cold and hungry on the street. His brother, his blood, had been right here, close enough to see the lights of his towering buildings, yet worlds away. The unfairness, the cruel irony of their separation, Oscar drowning in money, Daniel dying with nothing but a used coat, was a suffocating realization. He knelt down, ignoring the snow soaking into the knees of his expensive trousers. He looked directly at the little boy, who was now peeking out from behind Lydia's arm. "What is your name, son?" Oscar asked, his voice now gentle, stripped of its corporate hardness. "Andrew," the boy mumbled, his voice tiny. "Andrew," Oscar repeated. "You look just like Daniel did when he was your age. Those ears, that little knot in your eyebrow when you try to figure something out." He reached out and gently touched Andrew's cheek. Andrew didn't flinch this time. Lydia was crying too hard to speak. Oscar stood up, his face set in a deep, complicated expression, part grief, part guilt, part fierce protectiveness. The transformation in him was staggering. The cold businessman was gone, replaced by a man wrestling with a ghost and a painful connection. He looked around quickly. The restaurant patrons inside were beginning to notice the unusual scene, the billionaire kneeling on the street. The urgency returned to Oscar, not for business, but for privacy, for dignity. "Lydia," Oscar said, his voice now firm, authoritative, but not unkind. "I am Oscar Franklin. I am Daniel's older brother. This is not how we do things, not family. You and Andrew are coming with me right now." Lydia shook her head frantically. "No, sir, I can't. I don't want your charity. Daniel never wanted that. We'll be fine. We just need to find a shelter for tonight." "You don't understand," Oscar interrupted, stepping closer. "This is not charity. This is fixing a wrong that shouldn't have happened. Daniel was my responsibility, whether I knew it or not. And now you and Andrew are. I am not letting my nephew spend another hour in this cold, not in a coat from a dead man." He took off his own, very expensive, heavy wool overcoat, the one he'd worn to the restaurant, and draped it gently over Lydia's shoulders. The coat was too big for her, but the warmth was immediate and overwhelming. "Joshua," Oscar commanded, looking at his son, whose eyes were wide and shining. "Call the driver, tell him to pull the car around now, and call Aunt Hannah, tell her to prepare the guest suite immediately, and tell her to buy new clothes for a boy Andrew's size, everything, warmest stuff she can find." Joshua, seeing his father act with such raw, surprising power and emotion, didn't hesitate. He pulled the phone from his pocket, his small fingers flying over the screen. He felt a different kind of warmth now, a profound sense of connection to his father that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with family. Lydia finally looked up at Oscar, tears still streaming, but now mixed with disbelief and hope. She couldn't speak. She just held Andrew closer, pulling Oscar's huge, warm coat around them both. The black town car pulled up to the curb silently. Oscar gently put an arm around Lydia, guiding her and Andrew towards the warmth and safety of the luxurious vehicle. The movement was a quiet declaration. The distance between the gold leaf and the cold street had just collapsed entirely. As Oscar was about to step into the car, he looked back towards the restaurant window. He saw his own reflection, no longer the guarded billionaire, but a man holding on to his last piece of family. He had come out for a dinner lesson on corporate efficiency, but he was leaving with a brother's widow and his nephew, bound by a frayed crimson thread. This wasn't the end of the drama. It was just the chaotic, uncertain beginning of a life-changing, impossible family reunion. Joshua knew their life, built on careful walls of success, was about to be shaken to its core by the unexpected arrival of the very people they had been taught to ignore. The question now was whether Oscar, the builder of empires, could handle the messy, unpredictable world of heart and kin.
The drive to Oscar's mansion was silent, broken only by the hum of the engine and the quiet sniffles of Lydia. Joshua sat next to her, gently holding the small, cold hand of Andrew. Oscar sat in the front, his posture rigid, staring straight ahead as the familiar, wealthy neighborhoods blurred past the tinted windows. He was the most powerful man in the city, but right now he felt utterly powerless, pulled by a current of emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. When they arrived at the house, a huge, brightly lit fortress of stone and glass, Aunt Hannah, Oscar's sharp, elegant sister, was waiting at the door. Hannah ran the family foundation and was used to managing crises, but not emotional ones. She took one look at Oscar's face, then at the weary, tear-stained Lydia wrapped in Oscar's coat and the tiny, scared Andrew. Hannah didn't ask a single question. She simply stepped forward and, with a silent, profound understanding, gently guided Lydia and Andrew inside, straight toward the warmth of the fireplace and the waiting guest suite. This immediate, unspoken acceptance from his sister was the first truly supportive thing Oscar had felt all night. Oscar watched them go, then turned to his son, Joshua. "Dad,"
Joshua said, his voice soft with awe. "What are you going to do?" Oscar leaned down, his eyes dark with determination. "I am going to do what I should have done 20 years ago, Joshua. I let go of my past to grab my future. I didn't realize I threw away my family in the process." He stood up straight, his hands clenching. "Lydia and Andrew are family, my brother's family. They will live here. Andrew will go to your school. Lydia will work in the foundation. They will never worry about being cold or hungry again." Joshua's face broke into a wide, genuine smile, the first truly happy one Oscar had seen all evening. "That's the best business deal ever, Dad." The unexpected outcome was not a huge financial gift, but the complete shattering of Oscar's isolation. He didn't just give a handout, he opened his mansion, his wallet, and most importantly, his heart. He welcomed the very vulnerability and messiness he had spent his entire adult life running from. The next morning, Andrew and Joshua were sitting side by side at the enormous breakfast table, laughing over a cartoon. Andrew was wearing a brand new, brightly colored sweater. Lydia was talking quietly with Hannah about the foundation's work, her face no longer haunted by cold and fear, but alight with purpose. Oscar watched them, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air. He realized that in chasing the boom market, he had forgotten the value of the human connection. He had seen a poor woman scraping by and was reminded not of what he had achieved, but of what he had lost. His attempt to teach Joshua a cold, hard lesson about business resulted in the greatest, most emotional expansion of his own life, the regaining of family. The billionaire who saw a poor mother outside a window finally understood that true wealth wasn't measured in towering buildings, but in the people standing inside his door.